Super Sentai is a long-standing franchise whose history spans 50 years, and it's pretty incredible to see how far they've come. And while there is a lot to take in for the franchise's lifespan, there are no doubt a lot of questions as to why certain things have been done, or what may even come to be. And well, that's the heavy air quotes topic of this video. As you've read in the thumbnail, in this video I want to address some what if questions I've always had in my mind regarding the beloved Colored Hero franchise. So let's henshin and get to it. Now, what exactly am I talking about? Super Sentai is very well known for doing a lot of things, most of which, if not all, becoming defining characteristics of the franchise and the concept as a whole. In regards to certain things, I've always wondered what would have happened if they'd been done just a little bit differently. These questions aren't really related to the lore and storylines of specific seasons, but more so about the execution of the concept overall. There are so many things that make Super Sentai special, and it's so fun to pose alternate realities where the franchise we know and love may present itself slightly or entirely differently. And while I say I'm asking these questions, I'm not really going to have an answer for them either. This really is meant to just pose some thought-provoking questions, explore the potential and possibility behind each one, and leave them out there as food for thought. I have 7 questions to go through. Some of these are questions I've had for a while, and some have really just sprung up in light of newer and recent developments. If you've had these kinds of questions in your mind too, feel free to comment and throw your thoughts into the discussion. This is not meant to be too serious, it's all just for funsies. Well, here goes. Let's start with our first question. What if Sentai rotated its color scheme year after year? Now, we've already established that a huge part of what makes Sentai what it is its team concept of differently colored heroes, with each color more or less belonging to a certain archetype. And while these archetypes become more or less traditional roles that switch in and out of each team, they end up becoming key components in the team's overall dynamic and formula, thus resulting in different teams with different visual personalities. And while we do see the color palettes rotate through, like maybe having green instead of black, or making the pink ranger a white ranger, what if each season was a complete overhaul from the last? Maybe there isn't a red ranger leader. Maybe it's an existing color we know or a new one overall. What if the face of the franchise that year wasn't a red ranger? In this specific situation, we already have an example of this happening with Zenkaiser as a face of the team during Zenkaiser's run, but there are a lot of colors at our disposal, and while Kyuranger and Kyuranger introduce a lot of rarely used colors as part of their team, I wonder what it would be like if those rarely used colors found a place on the core team. And I already know why this isn't the case. The red leader, of course, is a huge part of Sentai's identity. It also helps with thematic consistency from season to season. If it was taken in a different direction, it would probably be more similar to some of those non-Big 3 toku that I talked about before, where they aren't really bound to the red leader concept or even that traditional color palette in general. But still, it is fun to think about Sentai teams that take a bit more of an adventurous step out into the color spectrum. What if Sentai started to have colored visors more regularly? Now, admittedly I thought of this because of the Red Ranger Isekai anime, so I guess it's technically not a question I've always had, but I've noticed that a lot of Sentai inspired anime or even some of the non-Big 3 toku delve a lot in colored visors. When Sentai was getting into its consistent groove after Battle Fever J, it adopted the predominant black visor style that is most synonymous with the franchise. We would see color visors start to happen with Time Ranger, and then we'd see it again with Go Busters, and then we see it again with the Lupin Rangers. But surprisingly, this is not a common occurrence. A big part of Sentai's visual identity really lies within its visor, especially in comparison to how Kamen Rider executes the viewing window of their helmets. Now, I'm no craftsman, but I'll tell you all a quick story. When I was in high school, I really wanted to dress up as the Red Lightspeed Ranger, so my mom helped me sew together a suit and my dad and I collaborated on the helmet. The helmet was made from a papier-mâché frame with a big hole in the middle shaped like the visor itself. I took one of those full-face visors that my mom and grandma would wear when going out and slapped it on the inside. All that is to say, as a kid, I assumed that's how Power Rangers helmets were made more or less, with the sunglass type visor as the viewing window. So naturally, of course it had to be black. What other color would it be? Well, now that I'm an adult, I've learned that there are many different ways this is actually done. There is most definitely a material that can be viewed through while also possessing a color other than black. So while young me definitely figured that there was no other way to do this, it's definitely very doable. And like we've already said, it's not something that they haven't done before. They've already been very experimental with the visor shape, so why not the color? My thought is that they will need it to be a specific color palette so that it doesn't blend in too much with their suit, since they will be like 80% of their representative color. But it has been done before and would be super interesting to see colored visors again. Maybe after gozyuger, who knows? What if Sentai leaned less into the legacy gimmick? Sentai has a great tradition of keeping the spirit and the legacy of Super Sentai alive and visible in each of its seasons. This can happen as crossover episodes or movies, or even tie-in toys for seasons outside of the currently airing one. but there's undeniably a deeper tie-in for legacy teams into these newer seasons, with them having a sizable contribution to the newer story. And I definitely get the appeal of this, especially from a toy perspective. To be able to add Legend Sentai gimmicks into the line is very favorable, especially for Sentai fans who are into this new show but also want to give their favorites some love. I've always felt like that's a good balance of Legend inclusion. Sure, it's a bit surface level, but it allows the new show to exist on its own. But others may really like this deeper inclusion. The crossover episodes in Boom Boom Jir were for sure a Bakuage surprise, and they're definitely love letters to those prior seasons. And we're seeing now just how much the Super Sentai legacy will directly influence the story of gozyuger, with all the past robots being included in the same universe. Again, I'm not saying it's been done unfavorably at all, but I do notice that the legacy gimmick has become more common and more prominent, and while it is wonderful fan service, I can't help but wonder if it takes away from the season's core concept and identity in a vacuum. Or does it bear more depth for the lore and the storyline overall? Or maybe it's not that deep at all and everything already more or less exists very well on its own. You let me know what you think about this one. What if the word Ranger was used more in Sentai team names? This one will probably be a bit of a shorter discussion point, but as we've progressed throughout the years, coming up with new and fun names for Super Sentai has definitely not gotten any easier. As Ranger is a core term in this franchise, a lot of the seasons would have the full word built into their name in conjunction with another descriptive word for their season. While they do pull from both English and Japanese languages for the names, it becomes a difficult task to use newer and more exciting words, especially for recurring concepts. In terms of consolidating the word Ranger, one of the first examples of this would be with Bokenger, and by that I mean it didn't take on the full Ranger word, but just used the Jur part to add to the end of Boken. This is understandable, maybe Boken Ranger wouldn't have flowed as well, but then we start getting Gowanger, Shinkenger, Gozyuger, and so on. And if we consider taking out the word Ranger entirely, Go-Go 5 and Dawn Brothers are prime examples of entirely new naming conventions. I guess the reason that this happened is that the full Ranger word isn't necessarily needed as a Super Sentai indicator anymore. Therefore, it becomes less important to consider how well the first part of a team's name flows with the full word Ranger attached. While I think having Ranger at the end of the names does help with some uniformity in execution, this change does add an air of uniqueness to it as well, which I definitely respect. So perhaps the full Ranger ending is a bit of an old-fashioned concept, but it's one that I've always liked and would be interested to see if it makes a comeback. What if Sentai helmets became only partial helmets? Last year, I made a video that basically broke down the style conventions and design philosophies that go into the helmets for Super Sentai. And similar to their color-coded concept, the helmets have become defining factors for the franchise as a whole. But what if things were to take a bit of a turn like this? Yes, we all remember Ride Commons, right? Ride Commons was meant to be an Ikemen redesign of different riders across the franchise, all sporting drastically overhauled suit designs while still alluding to the characters they reference. And since the focus was on the dudes themselves, the helmets would be converted into more of a partial helmet or mask style in order to maximize each one's face card. This is an interesting concept that adds a bit more of a revealing visual to the typically fully hidden design. But it's not the first time we'd see this either. To reference tokusatsu-inspired anime again, concepts like Ranger Reject show their Sentai-like heroes with just the top part of their helmet and their mouths exposed, sort of like Anjumon from Digimon. And to take it back even further, Gatchaman has designs that more or less reveal the full face, with the beak-shaped visors being intentionally transparent. And while these are examples of the specific style, it is in another playing field entirely in that these aren't live action. If this were to be done in live action, it would require the actors to be suited up for a lot of the scenes, and there would be more stringency on choosing stunt actors who could pass off as them in certain scenes as well. So I get that it would be much more difficult from a production standpoint, but then again, how cool would that be? It would make it so that the actor behind the helmet becomes more deeply intertwined with their Ranger identity. It would be such a different way for them to become the face of the franchise with their own faces as a big part of it. And sure, that would make it way harder for Power Rangers to adapt, but where's the fun of not having a challenge, right? I do doubt we'd ever go in this direction, but I personally think this would be an awesome concept. Maybe do a Ride Commons for Super Sentai. Maybe I'll do it. Who knows? What if Sentai opening themes were more similar to Kamen Rider or anime opening themes? Making a theme song for a TV show is a unique sort of challenge. The song itself has to fit the overall vibe of the show, and if it has lyrics, it has to contain the appropriate messaging that the show itself is trying to convey. Typically, that means these songs are very situational, oftentimes directly referencing things that happened in the show. A perfect example is if you recall any of the English Pokemon opening themes. And while the theme song game in the West is one beast, the theme song game in Japan is way different. Over there, any song is a huge genre, and huge artists are tasked with recording theme songs to shows and anime. These themes do double as the artist's song releases, and they're a pretty big deal. While they still embody a certain mood and directive within the musical style, composition, and lyrics, they work as standalone songs and as important parts of the artist's discography. So why am I bringing these up in comparison to Sentai openings? Well, if you look at Sentai's versus Rider, I think Sentai more often falls into the category of songs that make more direct references to their show. Kamen Rider does this too, of course, but they're usually a bit of a step further away. Sentai openings usually use the name of their team or specific concepts from it, and for a period of time were named the same as their show. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, it's less likely for a Sentai opening to blend in as a normal pop song on a playlist than a theme from Rider or most anime. And that very well may be its purpose. Overall, Sentai has a both visually and spiritually colorful aspect to it, and a lot of it is enhanced by its music. Since the show was mainly geared towards young children as its audience, it makes sense for the themes to be fun and involved in having the kids chant the name of the show while they sing the theme. I've always been curious of what would happen if Sentai took on the Anisong approach. Would it maintain the same appeal and level of connection if they had less involved lyrics and connected with the show at a more abstract and thematic level? And we're actually running a bit out of time, so I'm going to close this out with a question that drew direct reference from newer and recent developments. What if Sentai stops the traditional combiner robo concept? Now, my original question was actually what if Sentai stops the All Gatai or Ultrazord concept, but the thought that instigated this question is a bit more basic and foundational. Gozyuger is introducing the Tega Sword, the henshin device that doubles as the Robo. It looks like the Tega Sword Robo will combine with each ranger's individual weapons to assume a more personal and individual Tega Sword Robo for each ranger. That being said, is it safe to assume that these things don't combine with each other? Maybe it's just for this season in that the whole premise is that each ranger wants to be number one, but each ranger having their own individual main Robo seems to be quite a far departure from what we're used to seeing. And while it's a far departure, it's also not entirely out of left field. From Zenkaiger onward, we see the Team Robo have newer and unconventional executions and implementations. For Zenkaiger, the Kikanoids were directly inspired by Legacy Robos and wouldn't combine as a group until much later. For Dawn Brothers, the Rangers assumed their Robotower forms themselves to combine into Dawn Oni Taijin. For King Oger, the focus was essentially on King Oger itself as the combined Robo of legend. And for Boom Boomger, the Robo would see itself as basically a much larger Bundaria Bunderes, with all the other machines being much smaller accessories to it. So it's safe to say that they are playing well within their bounds of exploring the Robo concept, but each of these seasons still revolves around the combination, which is a big question mark for the Tegasword Robo. And I really don't see a 5 Tegasword combo being a thing. Each one looks built for individual purposes, and it would probably be a strain on the wallet to have to buy 5 of them anyways. Maybe the individual pieces from the weapons will all stack onto one Tegasword. Whatever the case is, the absence of the traditional combiner Robo gimmick will also have an implication on the toy catalog as well, as we may not see the typical Robo sets or additional Robo toys that we're used to seeing. So if it indeed does veer in this direction, I'd be interested to see what this means for our toys this year, and of course for the combining Robo trope moving forward. And those are my fun, food for thought questions that I've had about Super Sentai. Again, this isn't meant to seek any firm or concrete answers or to be taken too seriously at all, but it is more of an exercise to entertain different possibilities within the franchise that we love. What are your thoughts on some of these questions? What are some of your Super Sentai what-ifs? Let me know. That's all I have for today. If you guys like this video, let me know and I'll see if we can do this again to cover some different areas of Sentai or maybe even Rider. As always, I'll be back next time with more fun Toku topics to Toku talk about. See you all next time.